Around the world, disasters are on the increase. In the past 10 years, earthquakes, heat waves, floods, hurricanes, fires, and volcanoes have killed over 1 million people, affected another 2 billion, and caused $4.5 trillion in damage.
I just never saw that much water. This street was probably this high.
The first words I said was, "Oh my God, everybody's dead," because there was nobody coming out.
Ito dati itong bahay namin. And then yun po ang nakawas out ng bahay namin.
Our homes are where we look for shelter, but when a disaster strikes, we're on the front line. If you think your house is safe, think again.
The house was destroyed by the flood.
We're going to reveal the hidden risks and ask, is your home built to last?
Building codes are critically important to life safety and property protection.
The public, they need to be asking these questions of the builder. Why won't you build me a home that will survive?
It's either pay a little more now or pay a hell of a lot more later.
We're going to discover how you can make your home safer.
Disasters are not natural. Nature provides events, but we provide the vulnerabilities that take a natural event and make it into a disaster, or worse, a catastrophe.
On May 20th, 2013, a Force 5 tornado struck a small town in Oklahoma. Residents of Moore had seen tornadoes before, but nothing like this. Over a mile wide, wind speeds exceeded 100 miles per hour, reaching 210 miles per hour at its core.
I had just come back from the hospital from my 30-day postpartum from delivering my first daughter. And after lunch, we came home, and I was exhausted from being a new mom and passed out on the couch with my daughter cradled in my arms, and my husband was sitting in the living room with us watching the news, luckily. He had told me to go get a bag together. I kind of thought he was joking. I think what scared me the most is on the tornado sirens at one point said, "Get out. If you don't have an underground shelter, get out. You are not likely to survive." Everybody in the neighborhood is trying to get out at this point. The only ways out of this part of the neighborhood are straight west, which of course is the direction of the tornado.
Sheridan and her husband escaped across the open fields. They were lucky. In just 2 hours, 24 people died and 377 were injured. Once the storm passed, Sheridan and her husband rushed home.
We were the first ones back in the neighborhood, and it looked like a bomb had exploded. It looked like everybody was probably dead. When he pulled up to our now destroyed lot, I was like, "Why are you stopping? Where are we?" I didn't even recognize where we were. All the exterior walls were gone. The front of the house was completely gone. The thing that finally made me recognize where we were was our tree.
For Max, Sheridan, and month-old Taylor, the car they were sitting in was all they had left.
It's emotional, especially just thinking how many people had died immediately. The emotional shock definitely continues. I know a lot of people that still have a very hard time during storm season. There's definitely a lingering trauma that will probably never leave.
Sheridan's family, like so many and more, were left with nothing. But could their home have been saved? It's a question scientists are trying to answer.
We wanted to build a facility that would allow us to mimic very carefully what Mother Nature does to homes. It is a unique facility. There's no place else like this in the entire world.
The Carolina-based Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS, want to make our properties stronger and safer.
I would say the closest analogy to what we're doing is the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety that crash tests vehicles, cars, and the idea behind that is to give consumers information so that they make a choice about safer vehicles, and again, to reduce damage and injuries and fatalities. We look at wind, water, fire, hail, and aging, and that will give us a better opportunity as building scientists and as the insurance industry working with the construction industry and public policymakers to figure out ways to minimize damage.
We're able to do tests on buildings in a way that nobody else in the world can, where we can build a full-size 1 or 2 story residential or commercial building and then subject it to hurricane force winds to look at the way the forces of the wind act on the building, how they pass through the building. We'll be testing a wood frame house built to the current code, the building code. It covers 90% of the country. We're coming into the inside of the house, the entryway and hallway, a kitchen off to the right-hand side, an eat-in kitchen with a little bit of a bay window for a little bit of an accent.
The test house is laid out as a normal family home. The Institute has invited journalists and experts to see how a house built to standard building codes will fare. It takes over 100 huge fans to recreate the destructive power of a hurricane. Destroyed. In a hurricane or tornado, a typical American home is wrecked.
I don't think that most people appreciate that building codes are a political issue. I think they just assume that they've bought a house, therefore it must be well built, or somebody wouldn't be able to sell it to them, much like you can't sell milk if it's past the expiration date. It simply isn't true. The average American home, unfortunately, is pretty brittle. And by that I mean it's not designed to be resilient, and that the building code itself is really a minimum. So when people brag about their house being built to code, it's really nothing to brag about.
After the 2013 tornado, Moore raised its wind design standard from 90 to 135 miles per hour. It became the only municipality in America with a tornado-resistant code. But making Moore's home safer has added up to $5,000 to the price of an average house. For some, the cost of peace of mind is a hard sell.
People buy a house, they look at a house, they look at the crown molding and the granite countertops. It's got a copper farm sink and faucet and a cool fireplace and wood floors. They don't ask a question about how's it built. Does it have hurricane clips on every rafter? Or how much lumber does it have in the roof? What kind of garage door does it have? You know, I've told realtors, you know, that you need to do a better job selling. You've got a better home here. Tell them about the $3,000 to $5,000 worth of extra material that's in this home that's going to save your personal belongings.
But some builders and more don't think the stricter building codes go far enough.
Building regulations here in Oklahoma, like all across America, are everywhere that I can think of. The codes are meant to keep people safe. And do they keep people safe? I don't think so. What you're looking at right now is an area that's been hit 3 times in the last 20 years. But unfortunately, the homes that are still here, they're built to a code that, although is the best in the state, it's still not enough to survive Oklahoma environment. More has been hit somewhere around 28 times since 1895. Will it happen again? Absolutely it will. Will it hit right here? Who knows? It's a crapshoot, anybody's guess as to whether it'll happen again right here. But it will happen again. It's just the reality of it all.
Come on inside. Why don't you come inside?
With that in mind, Sheridan isn't taking any chances.
So our storm shelter, which I would absolutely not have rebuilt without. We did not have one before, which is why we ended up leaving. It is basically a metal box in our garage, but even with an F5 tornado, if the house comes down, the box isn't going anywhere. Essentially, the debris will help keep everything closed, and I don't think I've ever heard of one of them being sucked out of the ground.
In recent years, America has suffered more economic losses from disasters than any other country. And according to the UN, it's getting worse. Extreme events are on the rise. In 2017, wildfires destroyed whole communities in California. The largely wood-built homes simply fuel for the fire. Whilst in the same year, in Houston, Texas, devastating floods hit 150,000 homes. Around 100 people died. Residents didn't know that the location of their homes put them at risk.
The U.S. population in 1970 was 200 million. Current population is 325 million. All those people have to live somewhere, and they aren't necessarily going to be living in hazard-free or low-hazard areas.
Cities like Houston have seen their suburbs expand as urban land becomes scarcer. It's here that you find some of the poorest homes in the city.
It was probably a few days prior to the storm making landfall that we received alerts and warnings to prepare for the hurricane. So I pretty much was preparing for a windstorm. And they told us we was going to have a substantial amount of rain, but I couldn't imagine the amount of rain that we received.
The waters of Lake Houston, a reservoir to the northeast of the city, look calm today. But in August 2017, an extraordinary 17 inches of rain fell in less than a day. The rising waters threatened affluent lakeside homes built on land designated as floodplain, land intended to protect the city. To save them, the floodgates were opened, devastating poor, mostly black neighborhoods downstream. The water rapidly rose to over 30 feet. Debris still marks its passage. Tragically, an entire family was swept away in the torrent.
The water was coming down all the walls. It was coming down in my bedroom, and it was just water everywhere. It just happened so fast.
It was really bad. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't, never saw that much water. This street was probably this high.
What's crazy to me is like there's a lot of people that live right here in Houston and they were not affected by the storm at all. And I mean, they have no idea. They have no idea.
I was in the flood water in this home for 2 days. It probably was maybe an inch or two above the windowsill. This is actually how I had to sleep. But I got in, I'm so small, so I got into this window, and this is where I just slept. I have no idea until now. If it's in a floodplain, I had no idea. And I've been living here 30 years and it wasn't a place that flooded, so.
Audrey was in trouble. Like many in her neighborhood who didn't know they were in a flood zone, she had no flood insurance. So she had to rely on government aid from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA paid for her emergency accommodation, but after that, Audrey was on her own.
I just don't think they offered the assistance that we should have received. You know, this is all that they're offering. And I thought it was very rude to say that it was taxpayers' money, but my response was, I've been a taxpayer basically all my life, so a part of that money belonged to me. Yeah.
Tragically, over 80% of the people who had flood damage did not have flood insurance. So over 80% of the damages weren't insured. And that now means many of these people are still struggling to figure out how they're going to rebuild their lives. More importantly, how do they rebuild their homes without insurance? Year after year, we're seeing as many as 10 or more natural hazards that exceed $1 billion in losses. And that's a trend that unfortunately doesn't seem to be slowing down. Here in the United States, it's also we have more stuff, increasing wealth. So cost of disasters have not necessarily followed inflationary trends as much as we build bigger homes with more value. That's also driving the increase in disasters.
Months after the disaster, many houses are still derelict, their owners unable to afford repairs. Desperate for funds, some have had to sell at knockdown prices. A house once worth $100,000, selling for as little as $17,000.
All right, you guys ready to go back to work?
Audrey was saved by All Hands and Hearts, a nonprofit group that helps disaster victims around the world. She kept her home. Support like this has been a lifeline for poor communities like Audrey's, but it can only help a fraction of those affected.
I think FEMA and the government is struggling a little bit. This hurricane season was wild. So FEMA is spread really, really thin. I think they received over 800,000 applications just for Harvey alone. So I don't know exactly the process and how it can be improved, but I do know that this is, I think, kind of a wake-up call that they need to maybe reassess how it all works.
All Hands and Hearts has pulled in volunteers from all over the country who want to help out.
Hands and Hearts, you see my smile, they really touched my heart. I just feel like it was a miracle from heaven. I really do.
Raising her home above water level would be the best protection against future floods, but it's not an option for Audrey.
My first advice would be, regardless of whether they tell you it's a flood-prone area or not, make sure you have flood insurance. Believe me, from this day forward, Audrey will.
Almost 5,000 miles from Houston, in the northwest United Kingdom, is the Lake District. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty. But in December 2013, the tranquility was torn apart. They'd already had the wettest December on record when Storm Desmond struck. Swollen rivers burst their banks, tearing up roads and flooding homes. Over 13 inches of rain was recorded in just 24 hours. The swollen rivers swept down towards the county town of Carlisle with catastrophic results. Martin Dyer Smith's home was flooded.
Well, I'm sure you'll be amazed when you see the size of this river. It's tiny. More like a drain or a stream than a river. Can you believe it? This little stream flooded about 800 houses locally here, and we had 1.5 meters in our house, and that's about a mile away from this river. And it looks like a benign little stream right now, but it's different when the flood water's about, I can tell you that.
Today, the water is long gone, but 5 years ago, this was one of the streets affected. The blue ribbons tied to trees, a reminder of floodwater levels.
The water was like a series of fountains when it came in through the house initially. Well, it was shooting up. And in fact, the pressure was so high that it blew the boards off the floor. We had no prior warning that this was a flood area. There was nothing in the deeds, the estate agents said nothing, the people who owned the house said nothing about that risk. We found out later that there had been floods, but a long while ago.
But the wait for the next flood is likely to be much shorter, as once rare weather events become normal.
We can't really afford to be surprised by some freak weather events. I think the time for us to be surprised is over, because we know the risks, we know that climate change is playing its part, and we can't claim ignorance and say, oh, our system failed. Sorry, it was the weather. I think that excuse is not acceptable going forward.
But this rugged landscape is not what it seems. Forests have been cleared and the course of the river has been re-engineered by generations of farmers. Once, this land would have flooded after rainstorms, slowing down the water's rush towards the sea.
We are getting, on average, the same amount of rainfall annually, but the difference is that we're getting that rainfall very, very quickly in a short period of time. So when it falls in the headlands like we see here, then that water gets very quickly into the river itself, and that river water moves down river really, really quick to our towns and our cities that have flood defences, but often those flood defences were absolutely adequate for the climate that it used to be, but not necessarily for the climate of today. When we have a managed river, often that means that it's straightened, it's overly deepened, and then when water rises, because that river can't connect to its floodplain, when you do get these severe flood events, it's much, much worse because of that over-engineering that's happened over the last 100 years or so.
When Storm Desmond reached Carlisle, this quiet town was left with a cleanup bill of $500 million. Now, the streets are back to normal. With the flood well behind them, Martin and his wife Allison are enjoying their beautifully refurbished home. Flood insurance paid for the rebuild.
Flood insurance is an important element of protecting people's property in the face of disaster. And here in the UK, we are actually quite lucky that we have a well-functioning flood insurance system. So most people who live in the UK are actually insured against flooding, which compared to many other countries in the world who don't have flood insurance is quite a significant feature.
But for most residents in high-risk flood areas, insurance is unaffordable. So the British government has introduced a subsidized scheme called Flood Re. It's funded by a small levy on all British homeowners. But on its own, insurance is not enough.
Flood Re is really a temporary stopgap measure to give those at high-risk flood areas the assurance that there will be flood insurance available for them. But it doesn't really address the fact that going forward, this might be a very unsustainable approach for the whole of the country.
An acute housing shortage in the UK means that new homes are being built in flood risk areas. And with increased flooding predicted by scientists due to climate change, the insurance burden will be even bigger. Disasters are also on the increase in the developing world.
Each year, disasters displace tens of millions of people. They cause over $520 billion worth of economic losses. They plunge an additional 26 million people into poverty every year. So these are enormous impacts.
On November 8, 2013, Typhoon Haiyan hit Tacloban in the Philippines. The Philippines has, on average, 20 typhoons a year, but Haiyan is the most powerful to have ever hit the country. Today, Merlita Marga and her husband visit their old neighborhood. The memories of what they call Typhoon Yolanda are still vivid.
Itong harapan ko, ito po ang dagat. Nandito po ako nung magganap yung Yolanda at kitang-kita ko talaga kung gaano kalaki yung mga alon, mahigit na 3 palapag na bahay yung laki. And then yun po ang nakawas out ng bahay namin. Pagkatapos, lumutang kami, nakaano lang kami sa banana tree.
The death toll has been estimated at over 6,000, and more than 1 million homes were damaged.
Ito po yung bahay namin dati at mga 80 meters siguro papunta sa dagat. Hindi kami nagkakasakit dito kasi nga presko yung hangin na galing sa dagat. Kaya yung mga anak ko masaya kahit na maliit lang yung bahay namin. Tingnan nyo ngayon, wala nang natira. Yan ang bakas na idinulot sa amin ng Yolanda.
After the typhoon, the vast numbers of displaced people had no other choice than to live in makeshift tents while the authorities made plans for their future. And that plan was to move people out of danger on the coast to safer inland homes.
What we're trying to do now is to move families from the danger zone. We're going to move 40% of the population to the north. So that's about 17,000 families. It takes a lot of time and effort. We need to provide them all the basic needs. For every area, we are going to put up school buildings, daycare centers, police stations. It's quite a big change.
In October 2017, over 18,000 homes were provided for the Haiyan victims in a new township known as Tacloban North. It's 40 kilometers inland from the coast. The concrete block buildings can withstand wind speeds of up to 170 miles per hour. Public buildings like schools are also being fortified to withstand typhoons. They're a high priority. Displaced children are vulnerable to abuse and sexual exploitation.
Yung feeling mo, ma'am, hindi mo talaga ma-express from yung classroom mo na hindi well structured, tapos napunta kami dito na hindi namin kailangan ng upuan, andyan na yung upuan. Teachers or mga estudyante, makikita mo talaga na masayang-masaya sila sa nangyayari sa kabila ng ng Yolanda.
Merlita Marga lost everything during the typhoon, but has now lived in Tacloban North for nearly a year.
Itong bahay namin, proud na proud talaga ako kasi siguro kung kami lang hindi talaga namin kaya gumawa ng ganito, mahigit 100,000 kasi itong gastos. Kung kami lang, siguro hanggang sa mamatay ako, hindi kami kakagawa ng ganitong bahay. Compared to my old house, I'm already safe to stay here because this is my dream house. I stay here with my family because we will all safe to stay and to live here.
It's early days, but Tacloban North seems to be working. However, back on the coast, flimsy new-build houses are appearing. There are still a lot of people living here, and many have nowhere else to go.
Pumapalaot ako pero takot pa rin ako. Tinitis ko lang kasi wala akong choice na gaano eh. Yun lang ang hanap buhay ko para sa mabuhay ko lang yung pamilya ko. Ganun na lang ang pag yung madaling araw na paalis na kami, tinitingnan namin yung laot. Kung malaki yung alon, natatakot kami magpalaot. Pag hindi kami nakakapalaot, nangungutang lang muna ng bigas para may pagkain lang sa pamilya.
For For people like Vic, life remains a calculated risk. "350 miles south of Tacloban is the capital of the Philippines, Manila. It's one of the world's most densely populated and fastest-growing cities. In Makati Barangay, or district, the super-rich live alongside the poorest in the city. Large, unplanned communities have sprung up. But rich or poor, they all have one thing they share: the risk of a catastrophic earthquake. Makati sits on top of the West Valley Fault. The risk of a major earthquake in a densely populated city is all too real. In April 2015, Nepal was hit by a 7.8 magnitude quake. 3/4 of the buildings in its capital city, Kathmandu, were damaged. 8,000 died. Tens of thousands more were made homeless. In Manila, the threat is so immediate that Makati Council holds daily emergency drills. This is also where concerned residents come for information. Makati Barangay is preparing for the earthquake.
This barangay has the largest number of buildings to collapse. This barangay has the largest number of people to die. And this barangay has the largest number of people to be injured. That's why I am preparing so hard my people. If the mega disaster comes, are we prepared for that? We are trying to be.
Jaylene Olfato is responsible for 73,000 people. She believes that most of them don't realize how much danger they are in.
Una sa lahat, ano ko sa Panginoon at tapos pag halimbawa mangyayari man talaga yan, dito na lang ako sa tricycle ko.
Pero nakakatakot talaga. Kaya lang minsan hindi namin iniisip.
Kung talagang ipahintulot ng nasa itaas, wala tayong magagawa. Pero very awareness kami dyan sa mga balitang ganyan.
In downtown Manila, the mayor of Makati thinks the area is so dangerous it should be abandoned. But in practice, that's impossible.
This is going to be purely voluntary on their end because I don't want them to feel that I'm evicting them. I want the community to say, okay, I have to make a sacrifice. I have to move out because my home is a danger zone. But I can give assistance if they voluntarily move out. The problem now lies with the homeowners that refuse to leave.
With most residents staying put, the council has decided to reinforce their houses against earthquakes. The process is called retrofitting. It's all done in partnership with a specialist nonprofit group. Raquel Lagramada is an engineer with the NGO Build Change.
Yung ginagawa po nila ay naghuhukay para sa pundasyon, para sa isang kolom dito. Kasi malayo po yung kolom niya dito sa corner, saka dun sa corner, medyo malayo po. Ginagawa po niya to para patibayin po yung opening na to. Kasi ito po yung window, saka ito yung door. Wala po siyang tibay. So, ang ginawa namin, nilagyan namin ng 2 bakal or tie column para pagtibayin siya.
The home of single mother of 4, Cynthia Miano Vargas, has been retrofitted.
Ang bahay ko dati ay hindi talagang matibay. 9 posts ang ginawa ng build change. Then pinatibay pa ang biga sa aking floor.
Build Change Inspector Linnell Ballesteros explains how it works.
At first, there was no reinforcement to hold this from falling out of plane in case there's a shaking. So what we did was we reinforced the walls and we connected them to the columns. And we also observed that the walls did not have these beams above them. So these beams are supposed to hold the walls together. So inside the beam are reinforcing bars, and these bars are connected to each other, and then they have some shear ties that are going to hold them together also. So in the case of an earthquake, the house will act as one. They will act together, so the walls won't fall off, the walls won't fall apart, and these walls won't fall into the occupants.
The idea is to create a fortified casing which stops the house collapsing. In an earthquake, falling masonry is the most common cause of death. But retrofitting does have its limitations.
It doesn't mean that when it's retrofitted, it's damage-proof. It will only minimize the damage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their homes will be earthquake-proof, because I don't think there's such a thing as an earthquake-proof home, especially in that area.
Mayor Binay is cautious about the effectiveness of retrofitting, but experts warn that the big one, a possible 7.2 magnitude quake, is imminent. For residents, anything that could help limit the loss of life and property is welcome. All developing countries face similar challenges. As populations increase, more people are put at risk from unplanned and unregulated housing, trapping them in a cycle of disaster-driven poverty.
We have grown, and we've put a lot of people at risk, in harm's way. It's an unfortunate and in some ways really an embarrassing statistic that it's the poor, the people who can least absorb the losses, are the ones who take the losses.
Regulations that could make their homes safer are either non-existent or not enforced. And that causes problems for residents of places like Makati.
Tayong nagpapamilya, kailangan natin ng security measure ng pamilya natin. Yung para yung kinabukasan nila yung maging maganda at maayos. Ang kailangan natin security. Family security. Life security.
People in the developing world, just as those in the developed world, need somewhere safe to live.
Pangarap ko sa mga apo ko makatapos ng pag-aaral. Lalo yung isa, si Bugoy ko, gusto ko makatake ng engineering din eh. Ito, kung siya mag-take ng commerce, ito hindi ko alam kung ang future nito maliit pa eh.
Pero kayo po, ano pong gusto niyo?
Gusto ko nito, magdoktora na lang. Kung abutin ko ba. Bye-bye. Sige, ingat.
As the likelihood of natural disasters increases, governments are beginning to realize that investing in prevention is money well spent.
Literally, we've been spending billions and billions of dollars in responding and recovering from disasters. We've only spent tens to hundreds of millions of dollars before disasters to mitigate risk. And I think that's one of the things we have to really look at. A recent study came out and said that for every dollar we invest in mitigation, we can get up to $4 reduction, $6 for targeted mitigation. Think of that investment if we were spending billions to buy down risk instead of billions to respond to a disaster.
At the test center in South Carolina, the typical American home collapses in 90-mile-per-hour winds. Now they are investigating simple measures to prevent such a catastrophic failure. Chief Engineer Tim Reinhold explains the roof is the most vulnerable part of the house.
When the wind's blowing around the building, it's trying to lift that roof up, it's trying to push that house over and tip it over as well. The stuff that's colored pink are the things that we would typically be looking for people to do to strengthen the connection between the roof and the walls and the wall and the foundation. And so when you look at those things, you're trying to connect the roof to the wall, and so you'll see these big metal straps up here that are hurricane type straps, but they tie the truss to the top of the wall.
Two identical houses, but only one has been strengthened. How will they fare against a 90-mile-per-hour wind, the lowest hurricane category? result is clear.
The typical cost to do the additional connections, to put the metal in there and do it right, is about 1% of the cost of a house.
With no federal building codes in America, it is up to local authorities to set codes and ensure enforcement. Here in Alabama, some coastal communities have decided that existing codes are too weak. They've implemented a voluntary building standard called Fortified. It's deemed by the IBHS to be better than Alabama's building codes.
The fortified home is affordable for every family, at every price point, at every income level. And that's really important because every family's home is important. And it's their biggest investment most of the time. And so if they're building to that fortified standard, that home is stronger, it can take more, and it can recover in a disaster.
The safety features of this home are similar to those of the surviving South Carolina test home. They can only be seen during the building stage.
As you're looking at the house, you'll see this particular house has shingles on it. You can use a variety of roofing covers, but these shingles are specifically high wind rated, so that when the storm blows and the wind and the rain are coming at this house, these shingles are actually much more likely to stay in place. That's absolutely the basis of the fortified, is making sure you get the roof right first. This roof system is actually tied to the walls at the top of the wall there to that top plate. That top plate is then tied directly to the studs that make up the wall, and then at the bottom we have the sill plate is actually tied directly to the concrete foundation with anchor bolts. So these are actually some of the straps that are used to keep the roof tied to the walls. The rafters or the trusses would actually sit right down in here. These would all be filled with nails, and then this piece right here ties down into the main wall structure, so that keeps the roof securely fastened to those walls.
The Gulf Coast is one of the most hazard-prone areas in the USA. In recent years, hurricanes Irma, Katrina, and Matthew, to name just a few, have brought devastation. The nearer to the coastline you build, the greater the force of the storm, and the worse the potential damage.
People love the coast. They love to be on the water. They love the salt, the seafood, the entertainment, the recreation. It's a magnet for everybody, and it is a very good lifestyle. The bad thing is we have to deal with hurricanes. Being in the insurance industry, we were finding that finding insurance for homes like this was becoming very, very difficult. And the insurance industry started backing away and raising their rates pre-Ivan and Katrina. And after the storms hit, there was a sudden knee-jerk reaction by the industry to pull completely away, which was not the right answer. And the only way a consumer can afford to build a home like this or afford to keep a home is to have affordable insurance.
There are plenty of new builds on the coast, but with insurance companies increasingly wary of providing cover, how do homeowners protect their most valuable asset? The way to keep insurance costs low is to build a house that can withstand all the hazards it might have to face.
That house right there under construction, which we do insure, the premium on that home, $700,000 market value, insurable value, the premium on that home would be less than $2,000 a year, versus the older home, not maintained, would be $3,000 to $4,000.
A recent University of Alabama study showed that fortified homes sell for more. Carl and builder Mike Henriksen work together to make sure new homes are secure.
This home is elevated about 10 feet above ground level. And at the at ground level, the tide could come in a storm. And during Ivan and Katrina, it was about this level here, but we did not take a direct impact from those storms. If it was a direct impact, it could be as high as the floor of this house. The house is bolted to the pilings, and it gets 6 stainless steel bolts going all the way through the substructure of the house that holds it to the pilings. So again, this engineered to meet or exceed all the winds that could be forced on this house here.
Some American homes are at last being built to withstand extreme weather. In other countries, houses are built to last far longer.
Back in '96, I took a trip to Switzerland and to Germany, and I saw how the rest of the world built, and down in the Caribbean, how everything's built out of steel and concrete. And the homes there were built to last for centuries, and our homes here are not designed for that purpose. Because we have so much land and raw materials and labor, we tend to build houses that do not last centuries.
New house buyers can choose schemes like Fortified. But what about existing homes?
A lot of local and state governments, other private groups have come up with tools for homeowners to build homes better and retrofit homes. Alabama has a Fortified program where they provide their mitigation dollars back to homeowners to go in and do some things like putting in reinforced windows and shutters and things that can reduce future damages.
Retrofitting your own homes is something that has been put into practice all over Alabama. Nathan Lippincott is a roofing engineer. He's on a mission to make homes stormproof across the states.
The roof is probably the most vulnerable part of the home. You have a lot of leakage, and you have sheetrock damage and cabinet damage and flooring damage. So it costs a lot of money to repair your house. With a bronze fortified roof, we're going to keep that, it's called a sealed roof deck. And our job is to keep that water out of the house during a storm to where you may lose a couple shingles, but we still keep the water out of the house during a hurricane.
Across the Gulf in Florida, there are similar challenges.
We face almost every natural disaster that you would face anywhere. We have hurricanes, wildfire, lightning, flooding. So we have a host of things that we have to prepare for, and it makes it a little tricky, but it's something that you can do when you're preparing your home, when you're in new construction, or even if you're remodeling your home. So it's something that can be done. Folks just need to make those plans accordingly, whether it's a new home or an existing home that they might be remodeling.
Homes are still being built that fail to meet the strongest fortified standard. But increasingly, homeowners are realizing that the small extra cost is well worthwhile.
Hey, Ricky, how's it going?
Hey, Mike.
It's good to see you.
You too.
Yeah.
And it's simple things that count. A strong garage door can mean the difference between surviving a storm or losing a home.
This door has a beam for each section of the garage door, and they're oversized beams to help keep it from being pushed in by the wind.
Yeah, exactly.
Because once the door starts bending in, it just completely
door
tears
fails,
away, and it
wind
comes
gets
away
inside,
from the wall.
pressurizes your house,
Yeah.
and off comes the roof.
And
So-
plus, the lag bolts are actually attached into the mason area as well.
Excellent. So it's not just the door itself, but the track and the way it's attached to the building.
The track and the brackets going in there.
All the
deep.
important things,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just one example of how homeowners can safeguard their most valuable asset. Good design costs more, but pays dividends in the long term. Changing the mindset of homeowners is key.
It would be a hard sell, I think, if the American buyer had to decide between nice trim and a home that could withstand a hurricane.
Right. We like bigger and better here in the States. And so I think for a lot of people, it's hard to give up that size. Personally now, I think it's worth going smaller and having the mental and the financial security. The joke in our neighborhood is they called us the neighborhood safe house. And they're like, we're coming to your house when a storm comes. And we're like, okay, just bring,
Plenty beer.
bring beer and a cot and we'll have a party,
In 1992, Hurricane Andrew destroyed 60,000 homes, revealing just how badly constructed they were. South Florida rewrote its building codes. Now, they are some of the toughest in America. But it took a major disaster to persuade lawmakers to act. While politicians move slowly, experts believe consumers have the power to bring about change.
One thing that we would encourage people to do is to get to know land use policies, get to know the risks that they face in the area in which they live, and see what the building codes are. If consumers demand better, stronger, safer homes, they will get stronger, safer homes.
The interest is not on building the best, it's building it affordable first.
There is a better solution to building homes that'll survive, homes that'll allow their families to survive and thrive for generations to come.
Don't wait for government. There are things that can be done from the household to the neighborhood level that will make bouncing back from a natural event much, much easier.
And across the world, homeowners have decided they're not taking any more chances.
Make sure you have flood insurance. Believe me, from this day forward, Audrey will.
My new house is going to be gold fortified, just because I know I don't have to worry about devastation during the next hurricane. I don't have to worry about it.
And well-built, resilient homes can lift people out of the poverty trap for good.
I stay here with my family because we will all safe to stay and to live here because this is my dream house forever.
We cannot continue to use bailouts after disasters to make communities whole. We've got to start building resilient communities. Climate change is going to change and grow disaster risk in areas that may not have seen it before. Yes, we're seeing more disasters. Yes, the costs are going up. And much of that is because of the way we built and where we built. Can we do a better job? Absolutely. When's the time to act? Now. People need to quit depending upon bailouts to clean up the mess. Let's fix it on the front end.